welcome to another Trust Vibes interview series. Today, we've got Habeeb Syed. He's a corporate attorney who has worked in the blockchain space since 2016, serving funds, startups, mining companies. He speaks and organizes blockchain events and conferences. He's a global mentor for the Korean Innovation Center, a charter member of Open Washington, D.C., and is currently working as a senior associate at Vicente Sederberg. Did I pronounce Vicente Sederberg properly?
That is right.
Great. All right, Habib, good to have you on, man. Obviously, you've got a background in law and more recently in the blockchain crypto world. How did you first get into that? Because apparently you got into it a lot earlier than a lot of people have, 2016 at least. So when did you start to realize that this was something that you needed to learn more about?
Sure, I kind of stumbled upon it actually. I've been a startup attorney for quite a while. I would work with various tech startups. Something came across my desk that looked interesting. I was a client basically doing blockchain securitization at the time. They've pivoted since. But there was a lot of misconceptions back in that day. You know, some people thought, look, you put something in a token form and suddenly you can go around trading it without trouble. And that's when when I talked with this client, I really started to try to understand the space, spent hundreds of hours, if not more, just, trying to figure out what exactly it was that I was looking at. Eventually, I realized, look, this blockchain thing relates to this cryptocurrency that I've been hearing about. Started reading more and getting more into it. Published a few articles, and was asked then to speak at conferences. Started organizing events around the space as well, and things just kind of snowballed from there as the industry was kind of expanding at a very rapid rate. So I got into the legal side of this fairly early. Wish I had been investing at that time.
Yeah. I know how you feel.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think initially, to some extent now, I was one of the people that would come in and I was asked to almost be the wet blanket at some of the conferences that I would speak at.
Right.
But slowly, I kept being shamed, I guess. I would say, look at all this regulation coming out. Crypto prices have to fall. Almost to spite me, they would end up doubling each time I would say anything. But yeah, I was always a believer in the tech, a believer in sort of the revolution taking place there, and I'm excited to see where the industry has come over the last almost decade now, right?
Yeah, no, I remember having a conversation probably back in 2018, 2017. And one of my buddies was like, hey, instead of putting all of our money into investing in this Mexican restaurant in Bangkok, why don't we just put it all into Bitcoin? And I distinctly recall everybody at the table just laughing. I mean, like, that's a silly idea. That restaurant no longer exists.
Oh, I am sorry to hear. Is there good Mexican food in Bangkok?
Sorry?
Is there any good Mexican food in Bangkok?
There's actually a lot of really good Mexican food in Bangkok. There's like 72 registered Mexican food restaurants there. I think COVID has probably cut that down by about 30%. That's why we had to close down.
Oh,
but
sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Back to kind of you entering the crypto world from a legal standpoint, I imagine it's very much the wild, wild west out there, especially when you start talking about it from an international perspective.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much to kind of wrap your head around. And then there's too many agencies that kind of like to, I feel like, just stir things up sometimes, right? Like, let me come in here, let me blow up this area. Everyone's running around in a frenzy, but I'm not going to tell you how you can be compliant. We're just going to kind of, dip our toes in the pond, create a big splash, and then, let's see what happens. I think, the one thing I tell all my clients is, despite the lack of clarity, and largely I speak from the US perspective, right? Being an attorney out here. But despite the lack of clarity, I think there's a general understanding that you're not going to, get put in jail or fined ridiculous sums if you are, generally you're not going to, right? I can't make a promise, but if you're trying to abide by the laws as they stand, right? I think there's an
Right.
understanding, there's a lack of clarity. If you're not engaging in fraudulent behavior, doing an ICO, then running off to Bermuda with
Right.
all the funds that you raised, or you're building a legitimate project, putting the money to good use, then there's some level of good faith there. And you might find out later that these authorities consider your activities a violation of the law, but you're not looking at getting thrown in jail for that, at least.
Yeah. Is there a certain amount of, I guess, leeway with regards to just negligence, just because things are changing so rapidly all the time?
I think so. It's not like an official stance, I'll say.
Yeah.
But just looking at who's been prosecuted and for what. There was a couple of different companies that have been sort of, let's say, from the SEC's perspective, right? And there's a few different perspectives here. Mainly, you're dealing with, say, the SEC and FinCEN over in the US, right?
Mhm.
Are you a security or are you a money services business? And those are some of the big questions that arise. There's been some, actions taken against different companies where the companies sort of tried to do things in good faith, but they clearly violated securities laws, for example, and raised money through the offering of securities in the US. They were fined, but, and forced to return the money. But at least there weren't terrible consequences, right? On the other
Right.
hand, you have situations where people raised money, then clearly engaged in fraudulent activities, lied about what they were going to do, and ran off. I think those people are generally going to be obviously more severely punished.
Right. I imagine you're doing a bunch of consulting, I guess, for certain people or organizations with regards to crypto and the legal matters.
Right. Serve as their attorney generally, sometimes advise on projects. There's just so much to handle. And, I'm a US attorney. I'll work with people out in Singapore, in BVI, across Europe, et cetera. There's just so many different jurisdictions to try to get down in these situations.
So for the people that you're working with, what's their main concern? Or is there a main concern? Or is it everything?
It tends to be a lot of different things. So, I mentioned two different regulators out in the US. The reality is there's no such thing as blockchain law, so to speak, right?
Mhm.
That's like saying cloud law or internet law. It's a technology. You can engage in a lot of different activities through it, right? So if you're dealing in financial transactions, then you have to worry about one thing. If you're doing NFTs, then you have to worry about another. If you're doing an ICO, there's something else here. Logistics, completely different, right? I think what I find to be one of the more interesting issues these days are with regards to DeFi and how that is going to be structured. And then, of course, NFTs, right? What exactly do you fall into? And even in the world of NFTs, there's a million things that you could be doing with an NFT, right? All it is a non-fungible token, but what does that token represent? Is it artwork? Is it a ticket? It could even be like a right to a certain financial transaction or something like that. So then even an NFT can get thrown back into that world of securities and financial transactions.
So how is that distinction made legally when it comes to this type of stuff, or is it right now?
It's still being made legally, and in some cases, look, the lines get blurred. But I think people, and to a lesser extent now, right? I think there's more logic now in the space. In the past, people used to say ridiculous things, in my opinion, right? There's some evangelical almost blockchain enthusiasts that talk about how no government should have a right to regulate tokens. If you tokenize something, that's it. It's not subject to regulations anymore. At the end of the day, you just have to look at what's underlying the token, right? What does it represent? If you look at eBay, for example, eBay is going to be selling goods, and to the extent it has a shipping center in California, I'm a California consumer, I'm buying something from eBay. There's not much call for it to be treated differently than a retail store that I walk into, just because eBay is doing a transaction through the internet, right? I think you have to keep in mind that general principle with blockchain as well. If you are issuing a digital trading card, right, through an NFT, then there's not really a reason that you're going to be treated differently from someone selling me a physical trading card. I think there's obviously complications there to the extent, look, the digital trading card might be issued from outside of the United States or outside of the country that the purchaser is living in, and there's opportunities for, I think, a lot of times maybe even less regulation in the NFT or blockchain space, right? Because there's almost a self-governance that's involved there. You have to worry less about frauds. You have to worry less about adherence to the contract, because that's almost encoded.
And the powers that be legal wise, are they going to be cool with just allowing that self-governance, or is that something that they're going to try and stick their heads in?
They will definitely try to stick their heads in. I think the key is trying to work with regulators to some extent, right?
Yeah.
I know organizations that come in and say, look, IRS, SEC, whoever it is, right? Whatever organization overseas, this is your solution. If you adopt something that kind of looks at blockchain systems in a different light, that allows them to be, say, self-auditing, for example, then we can actually work with you. There's a lot of efficiencies to take advantage of here, right? You don't have, you have access to all this information at the end of the day. An extreme example of this would be, for example, digital currency, right? Centrally banked digital currency, where the government then, and this is, very Orwellian, I think, and most people probably are not looking for this to be implemented. But imagine a situation in which the government is issuing a currency, it's fully tracked, they can see every single dollar or yen that goes to anyone, they can tax you on it because they already know how much you make, they already know where you spend it, they know everything about you. A lighter version of that, for example, would be companies keeping accounting records on a blockchain. Right. So rather than having to go through a lot of different things to the extent we do with a CPA and investigations, et cetera, there could easily be code written that combs through these transactions and finds the information that's needed or audits it.
As far as a quasi-Orwellian digital currency being created by a government, wouldn't the very nature of kind of blockchain cryptocurrencies and people being able to kind of just create them and place their own value on it inhibit anything like that from ever really being able to take off with value?
I think the issue is, at the end of the day, no matter how much we like to live in a digital space, we exist in the physical realm, right? You're inside certain borders, and we can't all, head to Estonia or the Cayman Islands or somewhere that's, more friendly and we don't have to worry about anything. We can try to transact in cryptocurrencies, and there's even transactions in cryptocurrencies at the end of the day, right? To the extent you're not using coins specifically built for privacy, there's a ledger. And I've talked with various people in law enforcement about this as well. And, they say, look, yes, it's difficult to crack these things, but once you crack them, you literally have a complete record of everyone who's ever transacted, with regards to a specific token. You can see the flow of money at a very granular level. And that's important to keep in mind. So even with other cryptocurrencies, I think, who knows how long it is before law enforcement figures out a way to do certain things with
Yeah.
regards to them. And then when it comes to, centrally banked digital currencies, I think the idea is that they're looking to potentially replace cryptocurrencies, right?
Interesting. Is that feasible? Do you think they can do that?
I think, I mean, realistically, yes, right? I think if China wanted to do so, it has, right? It can ban cryptocurrencies. It can force the adoption of a centrally banked digital currency. And then what do you do from there as a Chinese citizen? There's going to be dissenters. There's going to be people that try to keep cryptocurrency alive, that continue to transact in it. But the majority of people aren't going to trouble themselves with it, right? So I
Yeah.
do think that is possible. And to the extent that right now, for example, cryptocurrencies offer a lot of efficiencies, a lot of advantages, right? In addition to the sort of stick that a country like China might go around with in enforcing its ban on cryptocurrencies, it's offering a carrot all of a sudden, right? Here's this centrally banked digital currency. You can use it for a lot of the things you used before. There's all these different efficiencies that we offer now. And so me as someone who, operates in a more traditional space, right? If I'm a banker, if I'm an employee of a major organization, whatever, someone just trying to live their lives and move forward, I'm probably going to be very happy with the centrally banked digital currency, right? I mean, I might have issues with the authoritarian aspect of it or
Right.
whatever, but I'm not going to rock the boat, right? There's people that do. There's people that are revolutionaries or enthusiasts or whatever you call it. But I think to the extent that we imagine that cryptocurrency is going to continue towards mass adoption, centrally banked digital currencies could be a little bit of a roadblock there.
Where do you see it going in the United States? Do you see this being something that's adopted by the government here as well, federally? Or do you see it kind of staying on two separate paths where you still kind of have this wild, wild west of cryptocurrency where you've got all these altcoins developing and people using it in that regard, and then also the federal government creating their own currency?
Long term, I don't see a wild, wild west being maintained.
Right.
I think there's going to be something that happens, and you've seen this, recently with the bills that have been proposed in Congress in the U.S. And those are overreaching, frankly, right? The idea of trying to regulate developers and people validating transactions, miners or node operators, as almost as if you would a money service business itself, that is a little broad in my opinion, right? But if they really can't figure anything out and they're wringing their hands, I imagine, legislators might just want to do something like this to make sure that they're not losing a lot of value, that they don't have a lot of money operating in the dark. That's a danger, right? Realistically speaking, though, I don't see the U.S. adopting a digital currency anytime soon. And there's a lot of people having this conversation as to what a digital currency, a more ethical digital currency would entail, right? We talked about all the different things that you could do with a centrally banked digital currency. I think in the US at least, and I don't consider myself a very naive person, but at the least there's some stress on individual liberties, right? And I think there is going to be a conversation of, here's what we want the government to be able to get out of this. Here's what we don't want them to be able to get out of this. So we can eventually down the line, maybe a decade or two from now, adopt a digital currency where we don't feel like we're giving up any sense of privacy.
Right. Could you expand on what you mean by ethical currencies a little bit more?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of questions here. When you talk about a government being able to track every dollar you spend and to be able to look in on that, imagine, the same way we treat internet traffic or phones, right? There is an ability for the government to a large extent to be able to look at all of your communications. And to some extent they do, right? At the same time, there's a legal framework for when they shouldn't be. And I think with centrally banked digital currencies, there's a similar conversation to be had, right? Yes, we want a digital dollar perhaps that takes advantage of decreased transaction times and different efficiencies, but perhaps we want to limit the ability of the government to track that dollar, right? We want to have a need for subpoenas, for example, if they're going to come in and try to say, look, we need to see where this dollar went. Here's probable cause for us thinking that it's related to, the funding of terrorist activities. And, they go to a judge, they get something, not a subpoena, a warrant, or not a criminal attorney, but, they get something and they're able to then track that transaction. Versus imagine having the US government encoding a program into it that aggregates, the transactions that whatever, let's say one wallet is engaging in these hundreds of transactions, and this program is aggregating these to look at, hey, these 100 transactions, 5 of them contain transactions where then they bought the ingredients for a bomb. So automatically flagged, automatically going in, right? That's I think kind of the worry. Do you have a bunch of things running in the background where the government can automatically track what we're doing, can track suspicious activity, and go after people? Or say, you have a president who's particularly partisan and wants to see, who bought the New York Times or or something like that, and then track people based on that and take action. These are the kind of things that I think we're worried about when it comes to centrally banked digital currencies, and hopefully anything that's implemented will take this into account.
As far as just let's say Bitcoin and I know Ethereum's quite a bit different than Bitcoin, as it's kind of its own technology, but currently they're the two main cryptocurrencies right now, at least the ones that seem to be the most stable. Where do you see the usefulness of these two cryptocurrencies going into the future, especially when you have things like, say, the government starting to either create their own currency or regulating things more?
And I might be excommunicated for saying this, but I've always found Ether to be more practical when it comes to a cryptocurrency or token.
You won't be excommunicated. I hear that all the time. That's actually what a lot of people say that.
Okay. Good to know. Hopefully I'm in good company then. I mean, Bitcoin is great. It's sort of like, a legacy situation. And people love it because it was the first one, and there's a lot of buy-in, frankly, right? There's a lot of stakeholders and vested interest, I think, at the end of the day. That being said, it's by no means the most efficient. It's, and to Elon Musk's point, it's environmentally problematic. On the other hand, you have Ether, which is better in so many ways. In addition to like the technological differences, right, between the two, there's the fact that Ether actually exists for a particular purpose, right? You have the Ethereum blockchain. To the extent you want to transact on it, you need Ether. I think that gives it more staying power, in my opinion. So if there were a situation where, the need for cryptocurrencies generally is going away, Ether seems to me to be the more resilient. At the same time, I don't think Bitcoin is going anywhere, just because there's so many people that are bought in, and the rest of the space kind of relies on Bitcoin, right? I think I don't know what percentage of the market cap of cryptocurrencies it takes up, but it's a pretty high chunk. right? It's an outsized chunk. So I don't see it going anywhere. If there is like, crackdowns around the world and centrally banked digital currencies are adopted, then perhaps what has long-term mass adoption is going to be Ether over Bitcoin, in my opinion. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds.
Currently, obviously, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and most of the other cryptocurrencies all seem to be almost in a way tethered together based upon what Bitcoin does. Is that divergence starting to happen, or is it going to happen at some point, or do you see it kind of continuing down that path still?
I imagine there's going to be a divergence, right? Yeah. I think at the end of the day, as you get people more adopting blockchain tech more, there's going to be more and more cryptocurrencies that stand on their own and don't fall and rise with Bitcoin, right? And I don't like to say this, but it's almost like stock, right? I don't like to say it because that connection has problems.
Supposed to be the antithesis of stock, yeah.
Right. But so these are like companies that are getting up on their own 2 feet, right? And once someone starts using their protocol, their tokens, their platform, whatever the case is, more and more, they start to separate themselves, I think, and can rise and fall a little bit independent of Bitcoin. That being said, because Bitcoin is such a big economic player in the space, as it rises and falls, the purchasing power of so many people in the space and the treasuries of these companies, all of that starts to take a hit as well. I think the extent to which those effects exist now, though, is gonna diminish as you have, say, Intel using I don't know that this is happening, but using, say, the Ethereum blockchain, or governments using different blockchains, et cetera.
Backtracking a little bit to the NFT space, obviously this is a interview series for TrustVibes. How do you see this type of NFT app kind of atmosphere developing, as far as with regards to artists being able to monetize their creations and also being able to, I don't know, how does that work financially within this legal world, I guess?
It's an interesting,
I know, another big broad question.
Right. It's an interesting question, and it's something that apps like TrustVibes have to tackle. I know TrustVibes offers so many different features, right? From ticketing to artwork to music, whatever the case is, right? You're issuing an NFT for. Each NFT is governed by a different set of regulations and laws in each different country that it's in. Oftentimes, ticketing, might not have to work. You might not have to worry about much when it comes to, let's say, a song, right? Or a piece of art. There's always a question of what exactly the NFT entitles you to. And there's always the reality that an NFT is not, it's not necessarily a legal right, right? This is something to keep in mind. Now, for example, let's say that, you, Justin, publish a piece of art on a platform, and you mint an NFT, associated with that piece of art. Now, what prevents you from going out and doing another, the same piece of art on another platform? You can do that. At the end of the day, though, it's going to be governed by your contract with that platform, right? And then the value of your artwork is also going to be governed by people's belief that you're not going to do that. So you're still very much transacting in the traditional ways, right? So while an NFT makes transactions easier in a lot of respects, and it might hard code certain contractual aspects into it. For example, TrustVibes, is going to make sure maybe that you're not doing the same contract, the same piece of art you're not issuing it multiple times, right? It can't make sure that you're not going to, Unifty and doing the same piece of art, but at least it can make sure that people on its platform are not being, hoodwinked. And it has to do that to some extent, through the hard coding of the NFT, but to a large extent, it's a matter of how it interacts with legal authorities in each country that it's in, and its contract with you, right? The terms of use, privacy policy, et cetera, that you have agreed to by using the platform. I think that's something that people are still wrapping their heads around, right?
Yeah.
An NFT is not a trademark. It's not a patent. So that's another thing that you have to be concerned with, right? If you are creating an NFT, you still need to perhaps go over, to the USPTO in the US and register your trademark, or whatever country you're in, and do that. That's a complex thing that has to be untangled, but I'm seeing a lot of progress there, and I've talked with the TrustVibes team about this, and I think they're doing a good job trying to sort through how different NFTs on the platform are treated and providing for each of those scenarios.
As far as like having to trademark something that's being minted, doesn't the blockchain kind of protect your ownership based upon the nature of the technology and in itself? Or like, why would you still need to trademark something?
So let's take an example in traditional internet for now, right?
Yeah.
Imagine Reddit has its own blockchain. Then imagine, Facebook has its own blockchain. To the extent that you create a piece of art and put it out there on a Reddit thread, let's say it's an NFT, maybe no one else can copy that artwork on Reddit, right? No one can go around trading it or doing different things with it other than you. You've made it, you maybe transfer it to me, and everyone can see that, Justin made this piece of art, Habib now has it, Habib's posted it for sale on Reddit, fine. That's all within the Reddit blockchain. What prevents someone, though, from copying that artwork, going to Facebook and posting it for sale there, right? Facebook has its own separate blockchain. It's governed by its own rules.
Right.
That's important to keep in mind, right? At the end of the day, you're not going to be able to go to Reddit and complain, hey, Reddit, I issued this piece of art through you. Someone offered it on Facebook, right? Reddit's not going to be able to go to Facebook and say, what the hell, Facebook? This was made on our platform. You don't have a right to it. That interaction is not governed by the blockchain. At the end of the day, it's going to be governed by the legal system.
The issue is in no way being able to prove I made this. The issue is the fact that you have separate governing systems that are able to hold people accountable.
Right. Yeah. And, maybe there's a path where there is sort of an overarching connection between these different blockchains that audits this sort of thing. But even then, there's so many, like the law involves so many standards that have to be parsed through, right? That I think it's hard for us to sort of encode that as it stands right now into these smart contracts. For example, if I take your piece of art and I add my own spin to it, when does that become something separate?
I mean, that's an issue right now with music and film and everything already.
And, we have to tackle those same things. Those same things are going to be issues with the blockchain. The blockchain doesn't solve that problem, right? It does create a record. It does show me, look, Justin created this on this date at this time. This is his. I know that it's his. But, if I make a parody and I'm profiting off of it, how does that relate, right? Are you, Justin, entitled to some of the profits, et cetera, on that? I think where, blockchain is helpful is I could license your token or create an authorized parity off of it, and then you could be entitled to a certain percentage of profits, and we've encoded that into the smart contract, and so everything is working out well there. But we still have to struggle with how those interactions take place, and that struggle at the end of the day is going to be governed by the legal system. So if you want the protection of the legal system that would be offered by a trademark, you still have to go out there and apply for a trademark, right? Then you can go to Facebook and say, look, this piece of art is trademarked. I don't care that you're another blockchain. You're not governed by Reddit's rules, but you're still governed by the rules of the international intellectual property laws.
Relying on kind of the masses, if they have the knowledge that you made it first, like just being like, hey, I got all the blockchain data here. This is obviously mine. You don't think that's enough to decrease the value of, say, the copies to where they don't mean anything? Or is it a thing where he said, she said scenario and the internet's too big?
Yeah, I think the internet and the world are way too big. And sometimes people don't care, about who did it first, right? Everyone has a different idea about how art should be governed, about how the economics of this work, right? Artists might think, look, this is my artwork. I'm entitled to profit off of it, rightfully so, in my opinion, right? Others might decide, no, this is public domain. You put it out there, someone can do something else with it. And that's just something you have to deal with, right? At the end of the day, an NFT is like a certificate, right? It's a certificate that says, like, look, this is the original work. That's only worth something to the extent people care about that certificate, right? Yeah. I can go out and maybe find a way to copy that work, and it doesn't have a certificate. But if the value of that work is listening to it or looking at it, right, then someone else might be more than willing to buy the copy without a certificate.
So how does an app like TrustVibes kind of help people to navigate these types of scenarios?
One, I think, is education a little bit, right? Letting people know that you still have to interact in the real world when you're doing anything here. Two, it's I think a matter of doing the best you can within the platform, right? And recognizing that some things are out of your hands. So I think the cool thing about an app like TrustVibes is essentially that you are the strength of the platform is almost necessary for the NFT to have value. Yeah. Right? If people think that TrustVibes is something that has legs, something that's going to go far, something that people like to interact on, then all of a sudden having that NFT on TrustVibes is valuable. Otherwise, people will say, okay, this is an NFT that TrustVibes has issued the certificate, but I don't really care. I'm going to take it off of TrustVibes or make a copy, and interact with it on OpenSea, which TrustVibe enables to some extent. But at the end of the day, they can bypass TrustVibes. That creates a problem. So I think the strength here is the strength of the platform, right? The fact that it offers so many different ways to interact with NFTs, to interact socially, that creates a community where the NFT can be valued. And then people are incentivized to interact with that NFT on the platform.
So the strength relies in TrustVibes' kind of core goal of creating that dynamic community.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's well put.
I'm going to ask you what question I should be asking you. So you go and you do talks, I guess, a fair bit about cryptocurrency. I'm not sure if these are how big of events these are or whatever, but what do you usually talk about when you go to these? Like what are these people asking you to come in and talk about?
It varies. I think some people like to hear me rant sometimes. A lot of the times it was about the regulations that are in place here, right? And I'll what do you call it? I'll say I'm not an intellectual property attorney, right? I've dealt a good amount with the securities law and money service business laws around this space, and generally work with these companies around their corporate structure and their contracts and things like that. I think what's important to remember in this space is if you're looking to do something that's going to last, I think it's important to keep in mind legal compliance and structure. No matter what you do in the digital space, no matter what smart contracts you have in place, at the end of the day, you have to log off and live in the real world.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure that you're protected, right? That you're coming back to the real world, or that your token is, whatever the case is, that people have the rights they think they do, that people using your platform are able to rely on the protections of the law, that you're not running afoul of the law, et cetera. And I know that's a very lawyerly thing to say, but I think it's important to keep in mind because a lot of people forget.
I mean, it's good advice in general, as far as the world it becomes more and more reliant on things that are happening online. You've got all these, the blockchain has obviously created a world where people are now privy to doing things a bit more under the radar. And I think some people forget, you still have your human form that can be thrown in jail.
Right. That's incredibly important to remember. I've been through this thought experiment with a lot of people that are like, okay, let's say I interact in Monero or something and whatever. I'm like, okay, fine. But you're going to have to go buy groceries eventually. Right. And then the grocer is not going to be okay letting you pay in Monero. They might be okay letting you pay in Bitcoin, but if they're going to be okay letting you pay in Bitcoin, they have to use a payment processor. Payment processor is not going to let you do whatever you want either. They're going to have to follow certain laws. At the end of the day, you have to come back to the system that's regulated. And, you can do a lot of things. I can go online and buy an NFT and do different things without people knowing, but eventually I got to go feed myself or pay taxes or whatever. And that's all going to have to be done in the real world.
Habib, is there anything else you wanted to talk about at all?
There's a lot, but I think
okay.
I think we could save that for another time. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's really great talking to you. I know everybody over at TrustVibes is happy to have your input there and helping everything move along. And you're a good guy to have on for sure.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you for doing this interview with me. It's been good.
Everybody, thanks again for joining the TrustVibes interview series. Habeeb Syed, everyone, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Thank you, Justin.